first, you guys only met yesterday, so do you have any first reactions on each other's presentations?
The presentation was really good. I mean, I was actually surprised. I took a look at the website of Ceretai earlier, and I was just completely surprised that they did something that, I mean, at Scriptbook we've also worked on this problem, and we did this for text. But we never actually, because we just work on text, we never actually looked further into the audio spectrum, the video spectrum. And I was really excited to know that this company is doing the exact same thing that we're thinking, but just with this other angle and for a greater audience, I could say, much greater purposes.
And what's your reflection on their project?
Well, I agree, and I think, as I said, like my position is quite interesting because I kind of feel like we are doing the same as many others are doing, but we're doing it from an outside perspective rather than from an inside perspective. And I heard about Scriptbook already, like when we started with our company, people were saying, "Oh, you should get in touch with them because they're doing really interesting stuff." So I've known about you for quite some time, and it's really nice to finally get to actually be on the same stage together.
So when you say outside perspective, you don't just mean the fact that you don't come from the film industry, you also mean from the audience's point of view.
Exactly.
In a way, yeah. And you're very much with at the beginning of the production process.
Yeah, but we're also actually outside of the industry because we're not content creators, we're not producers, we haven't been in the film. We've talked to a lot of people in the film industry over the years, so we have some knowledge, but we still remain sort of an outside, data-driven tech company, and that is, I think, what this industry really needs, from outside push to because change and innovation rarely comes from inside a robust entity. It usually comes from outside, someone saying, "Hey, you should do this the other way."
And I think both or all parts of the value chain are really important. I mean, you are at an earlier stage because you look at the script level, whereas we come later in the value chain. But I think all aspects are really important.
There is something interesting that struck me that another similarity is that we are drowning in, like, it's not only are we drowning in produced content, but in a way that there's also this thing of, for instance, well, agencies, people who are being sent thousands, literally, of scripts, they don't have time to read them all. So sometimes it's also not about the quality of the project. Like, you might have written an amazing script and you might have sent it to a lot of places, and literally no one will ever have time to get around to it. So there's this idea of just using this kind of technology as a kind of pre-screening support to help select the projects that are worth giving to a human. I can see how that's very appealing. And of course, at the other end, just again, like the amount of content that we're seeing all the time is so enormous. So, but I wonder if, it's probably a consumer is less likely to use it as a selection tool. But still, that there's something there about just the relentless hammering of content that we're all drowning in.
I mean, the concept of AI is very, very broad. But what you're talking about here is the automation which can support in the decision making. And I think there are two types of automation. One is automizing what we're already doing so that it takes less time. And one thing is actually automizing something that we couldn't do ourselves. So actually using AI and machine learning to make us see things that we don't see. For example, because we are biased, because we are humans. So it's like two types of automation that can really benefit from using technology.
Yeah, and to pick up on the selection process or the processing of scripts in a huge amount is that one critique that we often get is, well, hey, I wrote this script, I spent so much time working on it, and now you're telling me that a machine is going to read it and he's going to evaluate my life's work? Really? And in a way, okay, that's a sensible reaction, but if you think about it, if you go to the industry and you talk to these people, what the process is right now is you send your script into one of these agencies, and there is literal film student interns who are going to have this pile of scripts next to them. They read the first page, they don't like it, they throw it away. That's the reality of what's happening. And so, okay, the chances of your script going through that process and actually ending up being evaluated by someone who truly cares about it is really small. So at least you have the machine evaluating it and maybe detecting something there, and you can make it further than you would have in the current process.
Okay, so I'm going to have to push back now a little bit on some of the things that we've heard. and I'm saying this like with all generosity. Obviously, you guys are here, so I love your projects. I love these companies. But I have questions, and one of those questions is that it's very clear to me that automating of the counting, like for instance, I know that in a lot of newsrooms we sit and manually count. I used to be on the radio, for instance. At the end of each episode, we would sit and count how many people of each gender did we have there, and that's the only way to become, for our own internal biases to become visible, for instance. Or reading a ton of scripts, it's the same. Like we're automating work that's already being done. It's very clear that these technologies can do that well. But already with the next step, I do become a little bit uncomfortable, and I'm sure that there are people in the room who are also becoming uncomfortable. You said people are just evaluating things with gut feeling. I'm thinking there's a lot of gut feeling in this room, feeling quite offended right now. I think a lot of people would say gut feeling is data, gut feeling is experience, gut feeling is built from looking at 1,000 scripts and knowing things about them. Isn't gut feeling just doing kind of the exact same thing that you're trying to teach the AI to do?
True. Okay, so I'm not saying that gut feeling is intrinsically bad and we shouldn't use it and humans should never read a script ever again. I'm all for these people using our system to support them. I'm not trying to replace these people's decisions. But the truth is that, only 1 in 10 movies actually make money at the box office. That's the hard fact. So the decisions that these people are making right now lead to that number. And we've come to the realization that this situation is just not stable. And so why wouldn't you use a technology that allows you to look at much more data than you ever could? Because literally an AI system can look at all of the scripts produced in the last 40 years. There's no way any human can read all of them. It's just impossible. And so why wouldn't you use that technology to just support your decision? You can read it, you can use your gut feeling, but at least take that as one of your metrics that you're using to make your decision.
I think we need to be humble to how we use AI and how we use it to support us, but we also need to be humble to the fact that we are not perfect. So we need to acknowledge the fact that I am not an unbiased person, if we talk about biases. I will not be able to make perfect decisions. And also the AI won't be able to, because it depends on how we build it, of course. But in the process of building machine learning tools, you can take these things into consideration, you can test it, you can rebuild it, you can try to perfect the process. We as human beings, we don't perfect that process. So I think you need to be humble to both facts, that AI is not perfect, humans are not perfect.
But I did want to follow up on that, because we know from quite a lot of examples that AI tends to be, often AI affirms bias. That when you are teaching, when you're using media, the media landscape which we live in, to teach machine learning, then that is going to become incredibly skewed in certain things, like, for instance, there's a very famous example, for instance, which was a passport system, I think in Australia or somewhere, where you're supposed to upload a picture of yourself, and then there's a script that's gonna check is the person's eyes open or closed in this picture. Is this valid passport pictures? It doesn't work at all on Asian features, for instance. So it will tell every Asian citizen that their eyes are closed in the picture, which is incredibly offensive and also stupid. And this is just a side effect of training the machine learning wrong, right? And what I'm wondering about is that, for instance, your system is looking at gender. It's looking at pictures and voices and telling what is male and what is female. How good is it with that? A lot of people, if it's a woman with a deep voice, short hair in a suit, is she going to read as male in the system or not? Are you, in a way, confirming these biases?
Well, the first answer to that would be, first of all, our system is binary, which means that we cannot detect trans people, for example, at the moment, which is a definite flaw in our system.
For trans people who want to present as their actual gender, it's great, but yes. Anything in between, it's a problem.
Or non-binaries or anything else. So yeah, obviously. But I think what we need to consider is that the process of building as unbiased machine learning algorithms as you can is a 3-step process. It's not just building. You need to first you need to determine which questions do we actually ask. And that's not a technical problem to solve. That's a social problem to solve. It has to do with gender research, if it's gender we're looking at, or anti-discrimination research and that kind of stuff. So which questions are we asking? And for that, you need a whole different kind of competence than for actually in the end writing the script. And then in between those two steps, you also have, how do you ethically train your model? So which data do you use to train it to answer the questions that you ask? And then in the end you have, how do you program it? And that's something that a technical person can do. But you need this whole spectrum of competence in order to build a system that is as little biased as possible. So you need to take that into consideration.
Even as you're explaining this, I realized, of course, why do I know what gender the person is? And that's of course because there are additional clues, like their name is probably, and their pronouns become clear from context. And of course, if I can detect a name and a pronoun from a TV show, so probably can the computer. So that could also be built in. Yeah. Well, I mean, again, then I have the same question for you about deep story. If the scripts are trained, if it's trained on stories that have already been told, won't it become incredibly reductive? It won't all of the, like, how deep is this deep story? Isn't it just going to present options that are like the most obvious in a way based on all the other films already made?
There are certain technical things that you can do to the system to sort of keep it very controlled and very, how do I say this, in the safe zone. And then it will indeed just fill in the most likely sentence. But there's options where you can just say, okay, there's always multiple options. So deep story sees a sentence, and then there's multiple continuations that it has in mind, and it just picks one and sends that as a response. You could just, there's a sort of knob you can turn, how exotic it can get. How wild can it get? And sometimes, okay, maybe it's going to make a sentence that doesn't make sense. But sometimes...
The bartender is a dog.
Yeah,
yeah, okay.
Exactly. But sometimes it just makes sentences that you go like, oh, hey, I didn't think of that. And it's in a way, you're talking about creativity, right? About where does the creativity of a writer come from? And I think Deep Story has read so many scripts and has so much information to use to produce new sentences that it will sometimes just create sentences that you wouldn't have thought of. And then to you, that is creative, that is original content.
But it's original, but I wonder if it's creative. Because like to me, when I read a script or when I'm listening to a pitch, I'm not asking, are they writing viable sentences? I'm asking, what is this film about something? Because sometimes you get a script that is like flawless, and like they've read their they've gone to the story seminars or they know their Aristotelian storytelling or something, and it follows the system, but you feel like in its heart of hearts, this is an empty story, there's nothing there. And so then it's about other things. It's about like, does this script, does it have depth in its themes, or is it observing something about the human condition? And I'm doubtful, like I'm worried that Deep Story might not observe the human condition.
Yeah, so I would agree with you. That's exactly the reason why I said that right now I don't see Deep Story writing a story full on its own, because it's probably going to generate sensible text, but there's going to be no message behind it. And that's exactly why we propose, okay, have Deep Story work with the human. And then maybe Deep Story can write the sensible sentences, but the human has to be in charge of the message it's trying to convey. So for instance, maybe there is a person right now who has a story to tell, has a message, but doesn't have the talent, doesn't have the capabilities to be an actual writer right now, because it just isn't built for that. Maybe a system like Deep Story could help that person to write more like professional sentences that he wouldn't have been able to write himself, but now he's able to tell his story. Now in this world, with Deep Story, that person is able to become a writer, while without Deep Story, he wouldn't actually have the talent to write that well.
Okay.
Or she.
Okay, but I'm a screenwriter of sorts. I'm I should also say, like, I feel like I'm a good storyteller, but I'm not a good screenwriter at all. And one of the reasons for that is that I don't have the discipline to think about narrative structure and formats and those things. Would it be possible for someone like me who feels like I have a lot to tell to work with a software that would remind me that, no, you really do need a narrative turning point now. Like we are...
Yes, exactly.
This needs to happen. That would it be able to understand my script structure as I'm writing?
Yeah, so I mean the idea is
today,
that Deep Story would be able to understand that there's a certain good structure for a script to be organized in, and then you can say, okay, this is what I want to write. Now Deep Story can help me how I should write it. Exactly that way.
this is a little bit out of my turf because I'm not in the film industry. I'm not a creator in that sense. But I feel like a common misconception about AI is that it is one of the biggest threats to the creative process. And I kind of want to say, from an outside perspective, aren't there 1,000 other things that are also a threat to the creative process? Our smartphones, for example. Isn't that very much a threat to the creative process?
Just like distractions.
Yeah, distractions, and also how we tend to not give ourselves freedom to explore and to imagine and other things that are putting us in boxes. So I kind of feel like, yes, AI, if you only use that and you put all your dependencies on, like 100% on the software, of course that's going to be limiting. But you have to see it in context, I think.
I think that's very wise, actually. Yeah, like when we're looking at creativity research, the real threat is that it's never quiet around us. We're never bored. Like if creativity
go out
comes
in
from
nature
boredom.
and listen to birds instead. I mean,
but I'd rather be angry at technology that I'm not using.
Yes, I know.
You guys travel a lot and speak to the industry, and I guess that you're getting a lot of irrational and angry and perhaps also rational reactions. What are some of the things that you would like for the industry to understand about this technology?
That it's not a threat. Like, we're not trying to threaten you or the industry. We're trying to improve it. And I think that's the whole thing with looking at new technology is, what is the purpose of using this technology? And that's why I am really stoked about, health tech and diversity tech, which I'm part of, and sustain tech and those industries that are starting to grow now, where you're actually using AI for a good purpose. You're not only using it in a way that is, enforcing what we already have, but you're actually using it to improve what we have.
So I think another example that you mentioned in your slide is the profession of truck drivers going away. And that is a change that is going to happen through the use of AI. But then you can ask the question, some of these people are going to lose their jobs and they might have to find other jobs. But on a global scale, is that a bad thing? I mean, have you taken your car and driven around the world? Every time I go out and take my car somewhere, there's at least one person that I come across and I'm like, where the hell did you get your driver's license? And the fact, driving is really a task that is extremely suitable for computers. It should be you should drive in the center of the lane, you should be precise in your movements, and you should be aware of everything around you. And it's just a task that is ideally made for computers to do. And the world is going to be so much safer if people just no longer drive, and we're going to be looking back like, how did we do this for so long? Well, now there's no accidents. Maybe there's one accident every year, and there's no more mortalities, and we're going to look back and be like, what were we thinking?
And the problem, I think, with this is that it's not the technological frontier that is restraining us. It's our system. Like, we have built a system that is not ready for self-driving cars and that whole ecosystem of new technology, because we don't have legislation, we don't have trust, and all of those things. So that's the system that we have built has an inbuilt survival instinct. So the problem is not that technology isn't good enough and that we cannot do what we want to do with it. The problem is mainly that we have to adapt our system to it, and we haven't yet.
Yeah. And I realized it was maybe silly of me to, because I suggested in my talk that it's mostly working class jobs that are threatened. It's a lot of law firms, for instance, are going to be able to automate a lot of work, and in the medical professions, just because it's physically impossible for anyone, even top researchers, to stay on top of all of the medical research. So a lot of those things can be automated. There are a lot of tasks in very traditionally middle class jobs as well, where you think, oh, but it's like intellectual work, so of course I'm going to be protected. Like, no, if it's just crunch power, the computer is going to do it. Is going to do it faster, and we don't know what the systems effects of that are at all. But I guess one thing is that does strike me, especially if we're moving towards an apocalyptic situation, is that I don't think people are going to need stories less or meeting each other less. I think it's going to be more of that need. That's going to be a bigger need.
And again, we're back to what is the purpose of using technology? Because now, if we look at which problems do we have, which challenges do we face, and for example, in your speech, you were talking about anti-democratic parties and fascists, and that is a real problem that we're facing. So how can we use technology to solve those kinds of problems? I think that's the relevant question to ask, not how can we use AI and then try to squeeze that into different industries, but rather which challenges do we face and how can we use technology to help us? Because that will also build this trust that the system needs in order to change.
I remember now, I just saw a news thing this week at one of these Trump rallies in the US that was on CNN, and then they often have fact checkers on, just like with the political debates and so on. But there were so many lies and errors in his talk that the human fact checkers couldn't keep up, like they couldn't correct the facts fast enough. And then it would be really convenient with an automated ticker that just would go like, no, 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 actually this is the number. So, I mean, there are also those kinds of things, I suppose.
If we go back to the lawyer example, the other week, I founded a subsidiary company for Ceretai in Germany. And the process for founding a company in Germany, that is completely non-digital. And it's like you have to meet a notary and they have to read the statutes to you, because as if you haven't read them before, and you have to have the signature of this person, and then you need to go to the bank physically and blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, and this can be solved without AI also. It's like Bolagsverket here in Sweden. They don't require you to do all that stuff, and that they don't use anything else than just a web page where you have a bank ID. So, I mean, there's also places. I feel like AI is sometimes, the villain in this, but there's a whole lot of things that can be attacked. That's a very aggressive way of saying it, but that can be solved with other types of technologies as well. Just digitalization in general, Bitcoin and blockchain and those kinds of technologies can also be used for the purposes that we want them to be used for.
And I guess one of the things that we were talking about before about like how public funding is going to go down, and that's inevitably will affect the film industry in Europe. But another way of thinking of it is to say, okay, no, we're going to definitely make sure politically to lock these funds at this level, because yes, there will be more needs for things, but we could fund some of those new needs by being much more efficient in other places in the public sector.
Resource distribution is such a challenge where we can ask ourselves, can we use technology and which technology to solve this challenge? And I mean, resource distribution, that could be a problem that is solved by blockchain, for example. It doesn't necessarily have to be that we have to choose AI for everything and that we have to choose the technology before we choose the challenge.
So you guys were talking, we've touched upon this in different ways about like the problems being that the systems aren't ready. And we can think about this on slightly different levels. But if we're thinking about it, like, do you guys, for instance, do you already see in your sector that there's some legislation that we will desperately need around AI that people aren't even working on yet?
There's probably a really big need for a sort of control organism, or much like we have for, say, the food industry or the medical drug industry, where people can't just put an AI out for profit. Because there's going to be AIs built in the next couple of years that are going to have a huge impact on the public. It might even be might provide a danger to the public. It's not necessarily that the AI itself is dangerous, but it's going to be other humans can use the AI to do harm. That's always the catch. And I feel a very strong need that there should be some sort of legislation or regulatory instance that always takes into account, okay, you're putting this AI out there. What is the equation versus your profits and the benefit to the actual public? Mm-hmm. Because companies are just going to go for profits. That's what companies do. But then sometimes those profits do not outweigh the dangers or the malfunctions that it brings in society.
Yeah.
And transparency is also a key word in this, which I know that you work a lot with also, because AI is often described as this black box. You just put something in and then you don't know what's happening and then something turns out. And you need to be transparent not only in what you just said with how can we put this out there and what's the relationship to our profits and who can use it, but also how did we make the decision to develop this, for example. So transparency in general in the whole system is really needed, I think.
My understanding is that we don't actually quite know. Like we don't know what it's doing with the data, so to speak, but of course we know how we programmed it. But the code, I would assume, is often proprietary. You don't want your businesses be forced to share the code.
You
right?
can't regulate that you need to put all your business secrets out there, of course.
No.
And as you say, sometimes what is the beauty of AI is that you don't have to tell it what to do beforehand. That's the thing. So some of it is going to be unknown to us, but there has to be transparency around the decisions that you make up until the point where the black box comes in, so to speak.
I think that an important point is that you have to sort of force companies to also take into account what could happen with their technology if people would maluse it. And if those dangers are too big, then action should be taken against that. You shouldn't just be able to put it out there. It's like you can invent a new food that is extremely tasteful, but if it's harmful to the people, then the food ministry is going to stop you from putting that out
In many
there.
countries, I mean,
Usually, they should.
Yeah.
They should.
An obvious example here that is connected to AI often is facial recognition in images, where like we're seeing, for instance, that it's used incredibly in an offensive capacity by, for instance, China against its own citizens. But it's also, I imagine that the technology already exists to just scrape my public social media, to monitor my public social media, figure out my address, and see am I home or not. Like I remember this was a worry when Google Glass came out. Like, yeah, but if you can just recognize everyone, it's going to be very easy to see whose house to rob, for instance. And this is already possible. And those kinds of things I don't think we're going to be able to stop them.
What I'm going to say now doesn't really have to do with the regulatory perspective of this, but I think this has to do with ethics, of course. And I feel like there's a need for more nuance in the ethics discussion, because now we have a lot of discussion around how do you ethically implement AI, how do you train your models, etc. And that's great, but I think there needs to be more nuance in how do we distinguish between initiatives that are ethically implemented, but maybe not necessarily for ethical purposes, and initiatives that are for ethical purposes. So, I mean, there needs to be a more nuanced discussion around why do we choose not to do this, for example? Well, because that would infringe my personal integrity or whatever. So that discussion needs to be more nuanced, I think.
And I guess because now, of course, deepfakes are getting pretty good as well, where you can take somebody else's face and put them on something. So we've had this discussion in this industry for 10, 15 years now, is that when do we start to have films starring actors who are dead? Like, when will the next Marilyn Monroe movie come out? And now we have the technology to do it, and to do it really well. There's no reason not to, except do we own our own faces? Like, we're going to see, like, revenge porn is a whole new thing. If you can just put anybody's face on anybody, which you can with technology that is free and out there today. So there are a lot of issues around that we haven't, in this industry, haven't even started to think about yet.
Yeah, I just want to add a comment to that also, that there's a lot of fear also as to what this technology, any technology can do. And I think in some cases, we also need to be a little more fearless and actually try some things. And I mean, that's quite a controversial thing to say also, because some things are not revocable. So I think we need to be very aware of which decisions we make and where it's actually relevant to overcome our fear and make some tests, and where it's relevant to actually do a lot of groundwork before we try something.
I'd like to go back to the example of Scriptbook here at the end, because I think it's a wonderful idea to read and validate somehow a script early on in the process. But that is based on an idea of screenwriting as something. Perhaps I am a struggling screenwriter, and I have written, this is now finally my third script, and I'm feeling like I'm getting somewhere, and this is really good, and I'm trying to get this thing that I have honed for months and months, possibly years. I'm trying to get it produced and seen. Meanwhile, in the film industry in Sweden, at least, that's not often how writing actually happens. You're going with half-assed, half-finished products to look for funding, and this is a mild chuckling / terror from the audience, but we all know that this is the case, right? And people are looking at the project and say, this is a strong project, this is this is really good, interesting, great. The script isn't quite there yet. And everyone says, yeah, no, I know, but when we get more funding, we're going to do some more rewrites. And by the time we start shooting, it's going to be finished. And by the time you start shooting, it's quite often not finished. If we're quite honest, it's quite often you get the funding and then you have to start shooting then, or you're screwed. So you're going to shoot whatever script you have at the time that the funding comes through. And to me, it feels feels like if I want to use Scriptbook in this process, I need to think about this completely differently. Maybe I would have a Scriptbook. How would I use it? Would I put in some kind of, is this a minimum viable shooting script? Or like, how would we change this system?
Yeah, so there's really no, how should I say, bottleneck that you wouldn't be able to use it. The only thing that is required, I mean, if that is the case, because right now we are indeed focused on completed scripts, let's say. Now they don't have to be the final shooting draft. We know that there's like white pages and blue pages, earlier drafts, but we assume that the script is sort of complete. If we indeed want to expand the system to also work on partial scripts, that is no problem as long as we train the system to also be able to recognize, okay, this is a partial script, and I have to interpret it as such. And there is no reason why the system couldn't see, okay, this script is not finished, but there is potential here. As long as we have enough data to train the system to become aware of that, there is really no reason why that shouldn't work.
And maybe it could be more specific about what rewrites are actually required in a way that we do not always are.
The commentary on that script is also added to the system, then maybe it could learn to also present the comments on the script.
Well, in that case, that's my wish for you. That's like a development. I know this always happens when you have a tech company. People come to you like, could you add this feature, please? No, that's my wish for the feature.
Probably the most requested feature is, okay, you tell me that this is the status of my script right now, but what do I have to do to make it better? Yeah. That is the most requested feature. Working on it.
Working on it. Good news. All right, what did you want to say?
I just wanted to make a comment regarding the script writing process, again, from a person who is not in this business. Isn't the problem rather that we have such a limited amount of time? At least, this is what I've heard from actresses and actors that I've interviewed in this Vinnova project that we're doing, that comparing to, for example, Denmark or Norway, they're given more time there.
To rehearse and prepare?
No, the whole process is given more time, so that this, stress when you get funding, you need to start shooting now, and the script isn't ready. Maybe that's the problem. Like the timing, time frame is the problem, rather than, the process of using technology to analyze our scripts.
So again, yeah, as often happens, the new tools make visible the completely unrelated problems that we need to start dealing with. We're out of time. Thank you so much for this calm and considered conversation. I'm super pleased. Thank you so much for coming here for us, Michiel Ruelens and Matilda Kong.
Thank you.